On September 11, 2001, a total of 19 men affiliated with al-Qaeda physically participated in the 9/11 attacks, all perishing in order to murder as many Americans as possible, weaken the United States, and promote fear throughout the country. The 19 men, who hailed from 4 different countries in total, were split into 4 separate teams, each of which would take over a plane and fly it into a particular target. The ringleader was Mohamed Atta from Egypt. During the time Atta spent on U.S. soil preparing for the attack, witnesses who met him described him as an angry and hateful individual with lifeless eyes, the exact person you might imagine when thinking of your typical Arab terrorist.
You have to look at them in their license. Then I looked at him and I saw, it made the hair on my back of my neck stand up. You could feel, it was palpable, you could feel the anger coming out of this man for some reason. And then a thought registered in my head, it had never ever done that before. It said, if this guy doesn't look like an Arab terrorist, nobody does.
Then there's just the opposite. Ziad Samir Jarrah, a person with a big smile and outgoing personality, one of the last individuals you would expect to be involved in such an unthinkable and horrific attack. Yet not only was he involved, but he was the leader of one of the 4 teams. He was the most hesitant of the terrorists, to the point that Mohamed Atta and some of the leaders of al-Qaeda became concerned that he might not follow through with the plan. Ziad Jarrah was the only one of the 19 terrorists from the country of Lebanon. He was born there on May 11, 1975, into a family that was completely secular and the furthest thing from fanatical religion. His father, Samir Jarrah, worked a government job as a social service inspector, and his mother was an elementary school teacher. Ironically, Ziad Jarrah had a dream to be an airline pilot as a young boy, but his father discouraged him because he was afraid he might die in a crash. Jarrah's uncle, Jamal Jarrah, described young Ziad as the kind of boy that was raised well and was treated in a very good manner. He was a happy boy. He never cared about politics. He was not interested in religion. Sadly, at some point after the days his uncle is referring to, Ziad Jarrah began to take a path towards religious radicalization, which would lead to his participation in the attacks. It began to happen after he graduated from high school in 1996 while still living in Lebanon. Jarrah traveled to Germany to study German and dentistry. He gained a reputation as a very happy and outgoing individual who loved to party and drink. He hung out at various nightclubs and went to beach parties frequently. He met a German-born Turkish woman named Aysel Şengün, and the two became very close, dating on and off and even living together for a short time. Friends and acquaintances of Jarrah reported that it was during this time he began to appear more religious and quickly became fanatical, declaring that there was no greater honor than to die for Allah. He stopped drinking and partying so much, and he began to criticize the way Şengün dressed, as it was not modest enough for his religious beliefs. Meanwhile, Mohamed Atta was also in Germany and had formed the Hamburg Cell, a small group of radical Islamists who became key operatives in the 9/11 attacks. After Jarrah moved to Hamburg to study aerospace engineering in 1997, he found out about the group at a mosque and eventually joined the cell, which also consisted of Marwan al-Shehhi, who would end up taking over United Airlines Flight 175, the second plane to hit the World Trade Center after Mohamed Atta had already crashed American Flight 11 into the first building. The Hamburg cell met up 3 to 4 times per week and held anti-American discussions, becoming increasingly radical as they did so. It was in late 1999 when Jarrah, Atta, al-Shehhi, and another member of the Hamburg cell, Ramzi bin al-Shibh, traveled to Afghanistan to meet up with Osama bin Laden and began training for a terrorist attack against the United States. They each swore an oath of loyalty to bin Laden and volunteered to participate in this attack, which would end with their deaths. On January 18, 2000, a video of Mohamed Atta and Ziad Jarrah was recorded with Jarrah reading his will. He shaved his beard shortly after the video and began to practice looking and acting more secular and assimilated in order to avoid suspicion as he prepared to move to the United States. According to Şengün, he acted much more the way he had when they first met. Jarrah's family were extremely concerned about his radical beliefs and tried to intervene, but they were unsuccessful. Jarrah was the only one of the terrorists who stayed in touch with his family and even maintained a close relationship with a woman as the attacks were entering the final stages. This was a primary reason he began to have doubts about following through with the attack. All 4 of the Hamburg cell members applied for visas to enter the United States, and all were approved except bin al-Shibh. He was planning to join Jarrah at flight school in the States but could not go along and ultimately did not participate in person. The denial of the visa may have saved al-Shibh's life, but he was still arrested for his participation in the attacks and has been held in Guantanamo Bay detention camp in Cuba since 2002. Jarrah attended Huffman Aviation in Venice, Florida, along with Atta and al-Shehhi. He moved in with some flight instructors, purchased a car, joined a local gym, and eventually earned his private pilot certificate. He continued to stay in touch with Schengen and even took a trip with her to Paris before returning to the US. In fact, he made several trips to visit her and his family, leaving and re-entering the United States more than any other hijacker. In November of 2000, he received his instrument certificate from the Federal Aviation Authority, and then in December, his commercial pilot license. Unlike stories about Mohamed Atta, Ziad Jarrah was described as kind, trustworthy, and fun to hang out with. He did not live or even associate much with the other hijackers, and instead made friends with the instructors and other students who did not observe Jarrah as being particularly religious or political. In fact, his relationship with the ringleader, Mohamed Atta, became very strained, and when Atta traveled to Spain for a final meeting with bin al-Shibh in July of 2001, he complained that Jarrah was not fully committed to the mission. He was making multiple visits to his family, visiting and speaking to his girlfriend, making genuine American friends, and taking the act of assimilation too far, to the point that he was actually assimilating and not just pretending to. He was a threat to the success of the mission. But al-Shibh spoke to Jarrah and was convinced that there was nothing to worry about. Jarrah would follow through with the operation. He continued to speak to his family and told them that he would be there for his cousin's wedding, scheduled for September 22nd, 2001. But he also continued preparing for the attack, making reconnaissance flights and boarding flights as a passenger to determine how easy it would be to get box cutters onto a flight. On September 10th, 2001, a day before the attacks, Jarrah wrote a letter to Schengen, essentially a suicide note, which contained the phrase, "I did what I had to do, and it is a great honor, and you will see the result, and everyone will be celebrating." That same night, he was pulled over and given a speeding ticket on his way to the hotel, where he would meet up with the rest of his crew, who would go on to board United Flight 93, a flight planned from Newark International in New Jersey to San Francisco International Airport. It would never reach its destination. Jarrah made a final phone call to Schengen from his hotel room on the morning of September 11th, and then, along with 3 other hijackers, checked into Newark International. They boarded the plane by 7:48 a.m. without a problem. Jarrah sat in seat 1B, the closest to the cockpit. The flight, scheduled for 8 a.m., was delayed, and it did not take off until 8:42, just 4 minutes before Atta crashed Flight 11 into the World Trade Center. Had Flight 93 been delayed just a few minutes more, it likely would have never taken off. The hijacking began at 9:28 a.m. At least 2 members of the flight crew were killed, and Jarrah eventually made his way to the cockpit. He sent out 2 messages meant for passengers, but accidentally sent it to air traffic control.
Hi, the captain. I would like to all remain seated. We are on board and are going to back to the airport, and our demand to remain quiet.
Because of the delayed flight, passengers on Flight 93 were made aware of the terrorist attacks through phone conversations, and they quickly surmised that this too was a suicide mission. They quickly launched a counterattack in a courageous effort to retake control of the plane back from the terrorists. Jarrah began to violently roll and pitch the plane, but the counterattack continued. He began to yell, "Allah is the greatest," as passengers began to break into the cockpit. Refusing to completely fail the mission and allow the plane to be taken over, Ziad Jarrah crashed into a field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania at 10:03 a.m., killing everyone on board, 20 minutes away from Washington, D.C., where Jarrah's target was. What government building the terrorists planned to crash into was never fully confirmed, but it was likely the Capitol or perhaps the White House. And so Ziad Jarrah, the most unlikely terrorist and hijacker of the 9/11 attacks, did follow through with his twisted mission and ended up killing 40 innocent people. A total of 44 people died, including the 4 hijackers, but the heroic efforts of the passengers of Flight 93 saved thousands of lives and an important and historical government building. Whatever caused the delay that day to Flight 93 was also an extremely fortunate turn of events, as if the plane took off at its scheduled time, the passengers would not have found out that this was a suicide mission in time to do anything about it. Thank you so much for checking out today's video on Ziad Jarrah, the head hijacker of Flight 93, and an interesting case in someone who was born into a secular family far from Al-Qaeda, far from fanatic religion, a fun and outgoing personality who enjoyed drinking and partying, yet he was quickly indoctrinated into extremism to the point that he was willing to die in order to commit horrific mass murder. Let me know your thoughts down below and click the link above for more videos on some twisted individuals who participated in terrorist attacks. Up above is a video on the Oklahoma City bomber Timothy McVeigh and one on the ringleader Mohamed Atta. Thanks again, and we'll talk to you in the next video.